And we also know that Victoria Newland, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, um, there were a couple of leaked phone calls that actually had her talking to the Ukrainian ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt and admitting that the US had actually spent 5 billion over the last decade to actually undermine the government of Ukraine, and Yanukovych, the democratically elected president, was actually chased out of the country by the fascists that have been put in place and trained and supported by the US. So that was a military coup, and Russia has a lot of reason to be very afraid of that because again, you know, you'll see Ukraine, if it comes into NATO, then it'll automatically become they'll automatically have missiles on their borders. And, you know, the people in the Crimea did vote overwhelmingly to stay with Russia. And the people in the Donetsk region have all voted overwhelmingly to stay with Russia as well. So Russia's not the bad guy here. It's us that's the aggressor, as we are in most of these wars, really. Um, so we're actually now poking the Russians, you know, with a big stick. That bear, that Russian bear, we're poking them with a big sharp stick, and we are moving towards a World War III scenario, and we have to take a lot of the responsibility for that. A lot of the responsibility. You know, people are saying that Russia's expansionist. Russia's not expansionist at all. Russia are just looking after their borders, and they know that the US and the European Union are very expansionist, very aggressive, and they have a right to feel threatened. So we'll go through a few more here. Iran, they're the bad guys as well, aren't they? Do you know? Do you know that in 1953 we overthrew their democratically elected president, Mohammad Mossadegh? And that was done basically because he wanted to nationalise what was, well, it wasn't British Petroleum at the time, but became British Petroleum. They were just taking all the oil out of the country. None of that wealth was going to the Iranian people. Mossadegh came along and he basically nationalised the oil. And he was getting 50%. So the Western oil companies were getting 50%, and the Iranian people were getting 50%. But you know, that was a little too much, really. So Mossadegh was basically overthrown by BP with the compliance of the British government. And so there was a coup in 1979 because we'd installed the Shah, who was a Western puppet, and the Iranian people overthrew him in 1979. And we look on that as a bad thing, of course, but for the Iranian people, it was understandable, not a bad thing at all, really. And talking of NATO expansion, let's just have a look at where the NATO military bases are there. And you can understand Iran wanting a nuclear bomb. We know that if the Western powers get even the slightest chance to actually go in and overthrow the regime in Iran, or even bomb their place to shit like we have done with everywhere else, like we have done with Syria and Libya and Iraq. We're supposed to be bringing democracy to these countries. All we bring is devastation, absolute devastation, devastation and death. That's what we bring. All dressed up nicely as democracy. So we can see in Libya, much the same thing went on in Libya. Again, Gaddafi was portrayed in the Western media, that complicit Western media that's owned by 6 corporations. So Gaddafi was made into the new Hitler. But did you know that prior to the fall of Gaddafi, Libya had the best literacy rates, best infant mortality rates, ethnic minorities had great rights, healthcare was free, education was free, housing was free, and this is what we don't like. You see, we don't like the Libyan people getting their own oil, getting the revenues off their own oil. We don't like it anywhere. We don't like it in Latin America, okay, because that money belongs ethically and morally to the corporations, to the 1%. So anybody who's anybody who's in the slightest bit socialist, anybody who wants to bring their people out of poverty, give their people a decent standard of living. That's what we call a Marxist state. And in go the jackals, in go the economic hitmen, in go the assassins. Um, so if you didn't know that about Gaddafi, just it won't take very much research. Just go and have a look at it. Because once you know what happened to Gaddafi, once you know that, I'm not saying he was a lovely man, we know that he tortured people. We know that because we sent our people, we used to send our prisoners to Gaddafi so that he could talk to them on our behalf. So we know he wasn't a beautiful man. But if you do a little bit of research, if you find out what happened to Gaddafi, then you can understand what's happening to Assad. The same thing's happening to Assad. He's now the new Hitler. You know, a lot of these Middle Eastern regimes were dictatorships. And Assad's a dictator as well, but there are dictators and there are dictators, and I think Assad in Syria really wasn't bad as far as dictators go. And again, we see the Western powers. We've been trying to knock over Syria for quite a while now. That's got to do with oil pipelines. It's got to the fact that he doesn't like Israel very much, and so that's why he's been knocked over. And so we saw again another conspiracy for you in the Western media. It was claimed that Assad's troops used sarin gas. But Carla Del Ponte, who's a member for the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on Syria, went to Syria, and she came back saying that there's no concrete evidence that Assad's forces has used that sarin. In fact, there was a lot of evidence to suggest that it was actually the anti-Assad rebels that had used it. So again, there's another conspiracy where the Western media is telling you one story, which is not the truth, and the Western media does that an awful lot. And also the elections that went on in Syria, there was UN observers there, and they all said that they were successful, free and transparent was the quote. And then let's take a look at Iraq. We all know, don't we all know? Don't we all know that we went in there on lies now? You know, the Chilcot Quarry, that's been 6 years in the making, that's not coming out yet. But I think, you know, we all know basically we went in there on lies. That's been well documented now. And, you know, we went in there 2003. We knew it was lies. We knew it was lies. And yet we all voted Blair back in 2005. You know, he was the master criminal there. Him and George Bush. And we knew that it was lies, and we voted him back in. So that makes all of us complicit. You know, this is democracy, and in a democracy, you have responsibilities. You have responsibilities. Okay, we had a war criminal there. We all knew he was a war criminal, and we voted him back in. So everybody is in this country is complicit in that murder and death that went on in Iraq, and also for the babies in Fallujah. Fallujah was attacked. Destroyed is the word, and a lot of depleted uranium weapons were used there, and that depleted uranium is going to hang around for hundreds and hundreds of years, generations and generations, and we see all these deformed babies, absolutely terrible infant mortality rate, and we're all complicit in that. And we see, you know, what the colonial powers did as we moved out of these countries post Second World War, is we left minorities in power, and what that means is that those regimes can't govern without our say so, because they're minorities. They'd be overthrown without our help, without our military expertise, and without us backing them up. So that's our post-colonial strategy, which has worked very well. And what we've seen in Iraq is that you know, there's, again, in the Western media, they make a lot of the Sunni-Shia divide, and that's not true. Historically, there hasn't been a great Sunni-Shia divide, certainly not a physically violent one. And so what we see British troops and our special forces going in there, and what we do is we create trouble. We create trouble between the Shias and the Sunnis, and then we just sit back and we let them kill themselves, kill each other, really. Saves us a lot of taxpayers' money. Very, very successful strategy, and we use that all over the world. And And of course, we do all this. We do all this in the name of democracy, don't we? In America, there's a very nice little organisation called the National Endowment for Democracy, which sounds high ideals and very benign, but actually, what they do is they go in and they stir up trouble. All these revolutions we see, the Arab Spring and the revolution we saw in Georgia and now Ukraine. These are all stoked. We've got the National Endowment for Democracy in there, spending billions, just fomenting trouble, just delegitimising often democratically elected regimes. And a quote from Desmond Tutu, he said, talking about Africa, when the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, let us pray. We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. And that's how we're using democracy now. Whereas we used the Bible centuries ago to go into these lands, now we use the myth of democracy. And, you know, democracy, the oxygen of democracy is a free press. So the only way democracy works is that we're all informed and we all have the truth. And because we have this complicit mainstream media, we just don't have that. Our democracy is dying of asphyxiation, dying of lack of oxygen. And just to show you how powerful this control of the media is, in 2003, when the Americans went into Iraq, 78% of the American population thought that Saddam Hussein was partly responsible for 9/11, which was just absolutely untrue. He had nothing to do with it whatsoever. He had no truck with Al Qaeda. But that just goes to show how overpowering that those lies are, really. So, I mean, you know, America's bust. This is the thing. You know, there's 66,000 bridges in America that are structurally unsafe, and they just can't afford to replace them. And yet, America spends almost as much as the rest of the world put together in arms and weaponry. So what we can see here is that there's a business decision been made to go around the world, raping countries, killing all their population, sowing death and destruction. That's a business decision because they want the oil, they want the resources, and so they need to get a return on that business decision. On that business decision, they need to see a return on it, and it's our job to make sure that they don't see a return on it. Because up until 1971, the dollar was on what you call the gold standard. So the dollar was pegged directly to the price of gold. And they came off of that in 1971. And so, in a way, since 1971, the dollar hasn't really been backed by anything. But that's an illusion, really, because what the dollar's backed by is cruise missiles, tanks, and F-35 jets. So they need a return on that investment. Otherwise, they're lost. They're very, very, very nearly bankrupt now, and I think that's the only way to go. Really, is to see them bankrupt. And I think Putin's playing a very long game, and I think that might be his ultimate goal, is to see the US bankrupt.
I'm so sick of arming the world and then sending troops over to destroy the fucking arms. You know what I mean? We keep arming these little countries, then we go and blow the shit out of them. We're like the bullies of the world, you know? We're like Jack Palance in the movie Shane, throwing the pistol at the sheep herder's feet. Pick it up. I don't want to pick it up, mister. You'll shoot me. Pick up the gun. Mister, I don't want no trouble, huh? I just came downtown here to get some Hard Rock candy for my kids, some gingham for my wife. I don't even know what gingham is, but she goes through about 10 rolls a week of that stuff. I ain't looking for no trouble, mister. Pick up the gun.
you all saw him. He had a gun.